It began with a strange visit from Mark, a neighbor I hardly knew. The type of individual you might say hello to at a cookout or nod to while getting the mail. It felt strange when he knocked on my door late one evening because he wasn't a talkative person. Anticipating a minor grievance about my grass or an accidental item left on his porch, I opened the door. Instead, Mark stood there in the porch light, his face pallid. He seemed to be checking as he looked over his shoulder. In a hushed, solemn voice, he asked if anyone was observing. "Ryan, I must speak with you." I moved to make room for him. "You don't stand on the front and have this kind of discourse." Mark wasted no time. "Emily was there," he said, looking me square in the eyes. "Not at the store, not at work. She was in a relationship that didn't seem to be friendship." I was silent for a second. The words were too difficult for my intellect to process. I just looked at him in an attempt to determine whether this was an error or some kind of practical joke. "Are you certain?" I finally inquired in a calm voice, but my stomach was in knots. He gave a nod. "I've seen her a few times in various locations. The same individual." He sighed, which made me wonder if there had been a miscommunication. No, there wasn't. Something about the way he stated it, the calm urgency, the almost remorseful tone, prevented me from dismissing it as nonsense. I realized Mark wasn't the type to stir things up without a good reason. "Downtown," he said. "It was at a restaurant the last time." They were comfortably seated in a booth in a corner. Although I didn't intend to snoop, it was difficult to avoid noticing. I hardly heard Mark as he stayed for a few more minutes, giving me evasive information and clumsy excuses. My thoughts were racing. Due to back-to-back meetings and team dinners, Emily has been working late a lot lately. I trusted her. I wanted to trust her. I sat in the living room looking at nothing after Mark left. My instinct was to go straight to Emily and ask her questions. However, the colder, more analytical side of me demanded evidence. When she arrived home that evening, happy and brimming with tales of her successful day, I went along with it. I nodded, grinned, and acted as though I hadn't already decided my course of action. By the time she said goodnight and went to bed, I had already decided. Without proof, I wasn't going to blame her. I had to witness it for myself. I got the start from Mark. It was time for me to learn the truth. Emily pretended nothing was wrong the following morning. She gave me a farewell kiss. She laughed lightheartedly and smiled brightly as she left for work. On my way home, she even reminded me to get groceries. I was tired of being the naive husband, but it felt unreal, like I was in a movie where everyone but me knew the plot. I didn't start by directly snooping on her phone. Emily was too intelligent for that, I knew. It wouldn't be in the open if she had something to hide. Rather, I waited until she was taking a shower and looked at her alerts in passing. Nothing out of the ordinary. No enigmatic texts or unidentified digits. As if daring someone to look, she even had her business email open on the screen. She was hiding. I understood that this would not be simple. I made the decision to follow her at that point. I assumed Emily's routine was predictable. She always arrived home at 6 p.m. after leaving for work at precisely 8 a.m. But something wasn't quite right when I parked across the street from her workplace that day. Yes, she entered the building, but she was only there for 15 minutes. I saw her emerge again, scanning the area as if to see whether anyone was observing. A black automobile pulled up, and she moved quickly down the block and got into the passenger seat. The driver was a man in his mid-30s with a smug grin and sunglasses. Even though I didn't recognize him, Emily's smile wasn't the same as the one she gave me. As they drove away, my chest constricted. I was angry and incredulous at the same time, but I made myself keep my composure. I kept a safe distance behind them, my hands tightly holding the wheel. It made my knuckles white. They didn't travel very far. It was a modest hotel on the outskirts of the city center, the type of location people go to avoid being noticed. With my heart racing, I parked across the street. There was a part of me that wanted to barge in, grab her by the arm, and demand an explanation, but another part of me, the rational part, kept me seated, recognizing that the time was not yet right. I grabbed my phone instead. Emily was in for another surprise if she believed she could get away with lying. As they strolled into the hotel together, laughing as if nothing were wrong, I took pictures and then waited. An hour went by, then two. with my rage simmering beneath the surface. They appeared at ease and informal when they eventually emerged. The man's arm was slackly slung over Emily's shoulder as she arranged her hair. As they said their goodbyes, I took a quick film to document her kissing him. Slow, long, passionate, the kind of kiss she hadn't given me in months. I had all the evidence I required by the time I went home, but rather than feeling content, I felt as if someone had hollowed out my insides, leaving me with nothing but uncertainty and rage. After a few hours, Emily entered the room as if nothing had happened. She even claimed to have picked up takeout on her way home from work. I was a storm inside, but I played along just as I had the previous evening. I wasn't going to confront her head-on. I was determined to disprove her falsehoods. I had trouble sleeping that night. Emily was dozing quietly next to me, her expression serene in the low light. How could she appear so naive? How could she know what she was doing behind my back and still sleep with me, laugh with me, and eat supper with me? My proof was insufficient. Not quite yet. I wanted more. While pictures and a film could expose her deception, I wanted to do more than simply accuse her. I desired to dismantle the facade she had so meticulously constructed. I called in sick to work the following day. After kissing me on the cheek and saying "feel better," Emily departed at her regular time. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and headed out to follow her. Naturally, she didn't go to her job. She went to a coffee shop downtown this time. She sipped her latte while browsing through her phone at a table by the window. She appeared at ease, as though she had no worries at all. 20 minutes later, the same man in the same black automobile arrived. They began leaning in close, laughing, and conversing after he slid into the seat across from her. At one point, she touched his arm, and my chest was heated with rage. I parked in a spot where they couldn't see me and entered the coffee shop, staying far enough away to hear bits of their talk. "You're awful," at one point she said, laughing like a teenager. He answered with a lottery-winning smile. It made me sick. After an hour or so of conversation, they departed. I followed them once more, this time to a park across town. Holding hands and conversing as if they were in a twisted romantic comedy, they sat on a bench. I made another video and took additional pictures. I couldn't stop, even if every minute felt like a kick to the stomach. I wasn't merely collecting proof. I was getting ready for battle. I remained behind and stared at the place where they had been sitting when they eventually left. When Emily returned home that evening, she was in a great mood, and I felt like a stranger in my own life as I watched everything I had worked so hard to build fall apart around me. She poured me a glass of wine and prepared dinner, something she hadn't done in weeks. "You have been putting forth a lot of effort lately," she said with a saintly smile. "You're worthy of unwinding." On the surface, her words were pleasant, but on the inside, they were poison. I was fuming on the inside, but I played along, thanking her and smiling. She believed she had me tricked. She believed her lies to be unquestionable. She was unaware that I was doing more than merely collecting evidence. I was preparing the scene. Now that the game had started, I had no intention of losing. Emily got up early the following morning, humming to herself. She gave me her customary farewell kiss as she prepared for her workday, but she lingered a little longer than normal. "Remember," she replied with a charming smile, "please don't wait up for me because I have a late meeting tonight." The boldness. I nodded and mustered a grin as I watched her leave as if nothing could ever touch her. I didn't immediately follow her this time. I was already aware of her destination. The same lies from the same man. Rather, I began implementing my strategy. I called Mark first. After his first warning, I hadn't spoken to him much, but now I needed someone else's opinion. "You were correct. I have proof," I responded, maintaining my composure in spite of the anger that was bubbling beneath. "I need your assistance." Mark didn't think twice. "What are you in need of?" "I want to give her a hard blow, but I need to learn more about this guy," I said. "Could you tell me his identity?" After Mark gave his consent, he parked outside the coffee shop 1 hour later. Emily often waited for her to arrive. I began researching our joint finances in the meanwhile. I saw that the credit card accounts had expenses that didn't match our typical spending, including hotel reservations, pricey restaurants, and even a boutique jewelry store I had never heard of. Her work functions and girls' nights coincided well with the dates. The final straw was the jewelry. While I paid the bills and made plans for our future, she had undoubtedly been purchasing things for him. Later that afternoon, Mark gave me another call at the coffee shop to give me an update. And guess what, he said. His license plate was photographed for me. I thanked him as they departed, feeling a tiny bit of relief amid the rage over the license plate. I could find out everything I needed to know about the man destroying my life that night. Emily arrived home later than expected, with her hair a little unkempt and a faint scent of cologne. Not my cologne, clinging to her clothing. How did the meeting go? I inquired, leaning against the kitchen counter, forcing my tone to remain light. Wearying, she replied with a sigh as she let her luggage fall to the ground. Why they consistently schedule these things so late is beyond me. She was able to tell the falsehood with ease. She approached me, put her head on my shoulder, and gave me a hug. You are the greatest. You are aware of that. Please be understanding of my hectic schedule. For a moment, I froze. All of my instincts were telling me to confront her immediately. Rather, I gave her a forehead kiss and murmured, "Anything for you." She grinned. She slept peacefully beside me that night, oblivious to the tempest that was building behind my eyes. I planned my next move while gazing at the ceiling. Her mask was perfect, but it was beginning to crack, and I would soon break it completely. I initiated contact the morning following Emily's late-night meeting. I conducted an internet search using the clear picture of the license plate that Mark had supplied me. After a couple of clicks, I had a name, Tyler Blake. Tyler was just the kind of guy I had pictured in my mind. He looked to thrive on attention, had a well-curated Instagram full of gym selfies and fancy cars, and owned a hip marketing firm. I became more and more repulsed as I read. She chose this man instead of me. I needed to convey a message, but I wasn't going to face her just yet. Something inconspicuous, but indisputable. When Emily was at home, she had a tendency to leave her phone laying around. I never glanced at it, she thought, and she was mostly correct, but I didn't have to. I required entry. That afternoon, I unlocked her phone while she was taking a shower. She had been irresponsible enough to select our anniversary as the passcode. I nearly laughed at the irony. I didn't look through her later to be images or messages. I immediately went to her contacts and saved Tyler's number under the new name Mark, neighbor, for the time being. Then, via her phone, I messaged him, "I can't stop thinking about you. It was a fantastic night. Let's get together soon." It was dangerous. I was aware of that. But I was curious to see how she would respond if her carefully constructed world began to fall apart. Emily saw nothing when she stepped out of the shower. She carried on with her day, happy and unaware, until later that night her phone buzzed. I looked over as she picked it up while we were watching TV, and her expression changed immediately. Tyler's response to the notification was, "Everything all right?" Pretending not to notice her abrupt tension, I asked. "Yes, it was merely a spam text," she said. She quickly locked her phone and placed it on the coffee table, face down. Although she was good, cool, and collected, I noticed a crack in her mask for the first time. Although the remainder of the evening went smoothly, I could see she was preoccupied. She looked at her phone more than normal. When she thought I was not watching, her fingers were flying across the screen. I made the decision to escalate the situation the following day. I contacted the hotel while Emily was at her regular morning coffee shop meeting. She had been pretending to be a manager from her office while she visited Tyler. I requested the name on the reservation and said she had left a personal item behind during her previous visit. Without hesitation, the cashier confirmed that it was Tyler Blake. Bingo! I was prepared when Emily got home that evening. I refrained from directly confronting her. No, it would have been too simple. A printout of the hotel's booking confirmation, folded and placed in her work bag, was the tiny gift I left her instead. I wanted to see her struggle. Her secrets weren't as secure as she believed, and I wanted her to know that. That night, I saw her stop by her bag as she was getting ready for bed. Her face was pale as she unfolded the folded papers she had taken out. "What is this?" she asked, attempting to seem informal, but failing badly. "Actually, I mistook it for one of your work papers." I shrugged as I spoke. "I thought you might need it after finding it on the table." As she stuffed the paper back into her bag, her hand shook a little. "Nothing," she whispered. It was only an old receipt, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The initial blow had been delivered, and it was just getting started. Emily's attitude had shifted by morning. A strained politeness took the place of her usual unfettered spirit. She was trying too hard, smiling too long, and laughing too loudly. The tension in the air was evident even though she didn't pull the paper out of her bag. It was the ideal chance to put pressure on her without going up against her. "Everything all right?" I pretended to be worried as I asked during breakfast. She gave it a quick glance and paused in midair with her fork. "Of course," she responded, her smile too brilliant. "Why wouldn't it be?" As I sipped my coffee, I shrugged. "I'm not sure. It seems like you've been preoccupied recently." A moment of dread flashed through her eyes, and then she faked another grin. "It's been a stressful job. That's all. There is nothing to be concerned about." It was getting easier to see through her lies. Knowing that she was already tense, I ignored it while Emily went about her day. I remained at home to plan my next course of action. It was time to tighten the web after I had been holding back and gather my components. I started by setting up a burner email account. I used it to send an anonymous message to Tyler. "You underestimate how faithful your girlfriend is. Inquire about her spouse. Check her phone. Even better." I had a feeling that this would start something. She might rush to hide her traces, or Tyler might confront her. In any case, it would ruin their small affair and have Emily juggle lies on several levels. I then installed a little camera in the living room, tucked away among the trinkets on the bookshelf. I wanted to catch Emily if she attempted to text or phone Tyler from home that night. Emily looked worn out when she got home. She didn't say much. Every few minutes during supper, her gaze flitted to her phone. She excused herself to go to bed early and, unusually, didn't touch her wine. I didn't check the camera footage until she was asleep. As expected, she returned to the living room with her phone in hand approximately 1 hour after going to bed. She paced the floor while typing frantically, her movements precise and her face strained. A couple of times she whispered to herself. She spoke too softly to be heard, but it was obvious that she was frustrated. She finally picked up the phone. "Why do you think?" she hissed while speaking quietly. "He has no suspicions, as I mentioned." A pause occurred as the other person spoke. "I thought," Tyler answered. As she ran a hand over her hair, Emily moaned. "Simply relax. I'll make it right." "All right. He won't discover it. I'm in control of it." Under control. She was unaware of her error. I made the decision to increase the pressure even further the following day. I changed her belongings just enough to make her doubt herself while she was out. She took a pair of earrings from her jewelry box and placed them on the nightstand. Despite having recently been worn, her favorite jumper vanished into the laundry basket. The fissures were visible when she got home that night. She appeared worn out, flustered, and wary. "Have you tampered with my belongings?" she asked suddenly as I was preparing dinner. "Your stuff?" I looked over my shoulder at my earrings and said naively. Her eyes narrowed as she spoke. "There. Never mind now, but they were in the jewelry box." I gave a shrug. "It's possible that you moved them and forgot. Lately, you've been under a lot of stress." She did not argue, but her jaw stiffened. I saw her lying in bed that night, gazing up at the ceiling. Although she believed she was in charge, her self-confidence was eroding. That was precisely what I desired. Emily was clearly uneasy when she woke up the following morning. She hurried through her daily regimen. Her movements became increasingly frenzied and sharp. She mumbled something about a business urgency while gathering her belongings, hardly speaking to me. I gave a nod. "Pretend worry everything." "All right. Lately, you seemed a touch strange." After a few moments of inaction, Emily forced a tight smile. "I'm all right. Simply busy." She gave me a robotic peck on the cheek and rushed out the door. I looked at the previous night's camera footage as soon as she departed. Her face was a mixture of frustration and terror as she texted Tyler for almost an hour. She tossed her phone onto the couch once, muttering, "This is becoming unmanageable." Excellent. The point was precisely that. Knowing she was too preoccupied to notice, I made the decision to follow her once more. As it turned out, she skipped work. Rather, she took a car to another park. They sat on a quiet seat and spoke in low voices, this time with Tyler already waiting. Their body language spoke more than words, even if I couldn't hear them. Tyler made frantic gestures and appeared upset. I remained undercover, taking pictures and using a directional microphone to record their talk from a distance while Emily appeared to be begging him. I learned it online. We must halt. Tyler was speaking in a frustrated, tight voice. The danger is no longer worth it. Emily's tone was strong as she grasped his arm. That is not for you to decide. So far, I've managed it. Have I not dealt with it? Tyler sneered. Control is slipping away from you. Emily, someone sent me an email. Emily tightened her hold on his arm. And someone knows it. No one is aware. Ryan has no suspicions at all. I nearly burst out laughing. Tyler shook his head and withdrew. You have hallucinations. I've finished this. You are capable of handling your issue by yourself. I briefly believed she might slap him. Rather, she got up suddenly. She spoke in a low, poisonous voice. Take off, but don't assume you're getting away with it. Tyler sat on the bench with his head in his hands as she hurried away. This time I didn't follow her. For now, I had enough. Emily was quieter than normal when she got home later that night. A thin veneer of phony cheeriness barely covered her fury. A long day? I inquired. She attempted a grin as I watched her intently. You don't know. We took a seat to eat dinner. Between us, the quiet seemed heavy and burdened. To see how far I could push her before she broke, I wanted to do that. I said in a casual manner. Mark and I had met previously. He mentioned that he saw you downtown last week and claimed you appeared occupied. Her fork went cold. Her eyes darted to mine halfway to her mouth. That's strange, I thought. It's been a while since I visited downtown. She lied with such ease. I was almost impressed. It had to be someone else then. I allowed the moment to linger long enough for her to wriggle. She vanished into the bedroom after supper, most likely to give Tyler a call and attempt to salvage what remained of their pitiful liaison. I didn't give a damn. I had what I required. The recordings, pictures, and videos were all coming together. The entire thing would soon fall apart. Even though Emily believed she was keeping it all together, she simply wasn't aware of it yet. It was evident that Emily was losing her mind. Earlier than usual, she left the house. Her face was tense the following morning. No forced pleasantries, no kiss. Only a brief clip. See you later. Excellent. I spent the morning assembling my proof, which included the audio recording of their disagreement, the park video, and the pictures of her and Tyler in the hotel. All of it was damning, yet it was insufficient. The last nail in the coffin was what I needed. By noon, I got an SMS from Mark. She's back at the motel. The same individual. This was the ideal time to act. To stay out of sight, I drove a block to the hotel parking lot. Emily's vehicle was indeed parked next to a black automobile. My chest constricted. I was getting close to the door. I maintained my composure despite the wrath simmering beneath the surface. This was no time for sentimentality. Now was the moment for precision. I nonchalantly made my way to the front desk after entering the lobby as if I belonged there. I leaned in and said hello, and the clerk hardly looked at me. My wife and I are meant to meet here, but I can't remember the room number. The clerk, Emily Blake, paused to examine me. I pulled out my phone and gave him my best cheesy smile. She texted me to meet here, but I can't get through because of my bad signal. Can you assist me? He gave me the room number after a brief computer check. 214, regards, I said, my heart thumping. I stopped at the door to room 214 as I was making my way to the lift. I could hear laughter and muffled voices coming from inside, as well as the odd creak of the bed. Even though my hands were balled into fists, I didn't knock. Not quite yet. Rather, I took out my phone and began to record. There was a lull before I heard Emily's abrasive and defensive voice when I eventually knocked. Who is it? Room service, I said with a low pitch. I pushed the door, opened the remaining distance, and entered after it cracked open. Emily froze before she could respond. Standing under a sheet, her face was a mask of sheer terror. Tyler appeared equally scared as he frantically covered himself with the blanket. Emily's voice was little more than a whisper. Ryan, her eyes widened in surprise. I enjoyed the way her mask broke completely as I allowed the stillness to linger. Continue using my account, I said in a chilly tone. All I'm here to do is deliver. I displayed my phone, which was recording their fight at the park. Emily's voice filled the room, and her face became white. He has no suspicions, as I mentioned. With a moan, Tyler ran a hand over his hair. Jesus. Shut up, Emily said, losing her temper. She turned back to me after spinning to face him. I can explain, Ryan. Describe. I cut in with a sour laugh. Proceed. Describe the falsehoods, the jewelry, and the hotel. Tell me about your sneaking around with him, and then returning home to me as if nothing were wrong. Emily opened and closed her mouth, but nothing came out. Tyler got to his feet, still holding onto the blanket. I had no idea she was married, man. I'll save it, all right? I lost my temper, interrupting him. You are not the focus of this. My voice trailed off as I turned back to Emily. This is about her, and how she destroyed everything we had created because she was unable to maintain the integrity of her lies. She broke down in tears. Then she stammered, tears streaming down her cheeks. It had no significance, Ryan. I promise. It wasn't serious. It's not serious, I said, raising my voice. For nothing, you ruined our marriage. I retreated when she reached for me, extending a hand. Just don't. Her calm cries were the only sound in the room. I turned to go, halting in the entrance. My lawyer will be speaking to you. Don't bother coming home, I stated bluntly. You made a decision. My chest was constricted as I left. A combination of relief and anger washed over me. Emily's flawless little facade was in ruins. The trap had closed, and I was at last free. My mind kept playing back the scenario in that hotel room over and over again during the journey home. But it wasn't the type of dream you wake up from. Tyler's pitiful excuses and Emily's shocked expression. The falsehoods were gushing out of her mouth like poison. By the moment I pulled into the driveway, the weight of what had transpired had become unbearable. This wasn't a simple altercation or a setback. It was the end. The calm of the place almost made me laugh as I entered it. Together, we had constructed this house, where we had laughed and made plans for the future. I believed everything to be true and substantial. It was a shell now, nothing more. My moping was short-lived. I needed to get some work done. I called my lawyer, Tom, first. He was a straightforward individual, just what I required. I explained everything to him. The evidence, the affair, everything. This is a no-brainer, Tom said when I was done. You have indisputable evidence. We'll try to get a clean split, Ryan, but if she attempts to resist it, she won't have anything to defend herself. His self-assurance was a tiny solace. The next phase was more difficult. I gave Emily's parents a call. They had always been nice to me and treated me like a member of the family, but they wanted to know the truth. Her mother was still warm when she answered. How are you, Ryan? Not very good, Carol. Emily has been cheating on me, which is why I'm phoning. On the other end, there was a sudden intake of air. What? Emily, that doesn't sound like her. Are you certain? I'm positive. I spoke aggressively. I have pictures, videos, everything. I didn't want anyone else to tell you. Carol was quiet for a while. I'm so sorry, Ryan, she said. I'm at a loss for words. It is not necessary for you to speak, I answered, but I wanted to let you know that she wouldn't be returning. Carol said she would talk to Emily, but I didn't think it would really help because as I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Let's chat, please. I can describe everything. I chose to disregard it. Then another, I beg you, Ryan, avoid doing this. We are able to repair it. Later that night, the last straw was the audacity. Mark paused with a six-pack of beer in his hand. I thought you would benefit from one, he said as he entered. I gave a nod. I appreciate the gesture. Mark looked at the pile of documents on the table, which included hotel receipts, credit card statements, and text printouts, as we sat in the living room. She won't take this lying down. He opened a beer and spoke. I assume you are aware of that. She has no other option, I answered. It's finished. We spoke for hours. As I let out my irritation and rage, the weight of everything gradually began to lighten. Mark didn't tell me that everything would be all right or give me vacuous platitudes. I felt a ray of hope for the first time in days when he simply listened. I didn't answer any of Emily's more than a dozen missed calls or the barrage of texts that ranged from remorseful to flat-out accusatory when I eventually checked my phone again. I was done playing her game. She could scream into space all she wanted. Over the following few days, Emily's calls and texts increased in frequency. They were first desperate, full of excuses and vows to make things right. Then they were irate and accused me of being heartless for discarding what we had. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The following week, Tom filed for divorce. Emily had moved in with a friend by that point. That's what she said in one of her several voicemails, anyway. Where she went didn't matter to me. In theory, and shortly to be in the papers, the house was now mine, but the consequences weren't finished yet. Emily's parents contacted her once more. Her mother was begging me to change my mind. She was wrong. I know that now everyone deserves a second chance, Ryan Carroll remarked on the phone. It wasn't a simple error on her part. I answered in a voice firm but steady. She made a number of choices, knowing full well that they would cause me pain, but she didn't care. I can't forgive her for this. Carol attempted to argue, but I interrupted her. Nothing else could be said. Tyler came next. One evening, he dared to drop by my place without warning. Before he even knocked, I saw him standing on my porch like a lost puppy through the window, his hands crammed in his pockets. I went ahead and opened the door against my better judgment. "What are you looking for?" I inquired, my tone chilly. "Look, dude, He paused, looking at the floor. I wanted to say I was sorry. When I first learned that she was married, she informed me that you two were no longer together. Would I have known you? I swear." I interrupted him, walked off. Acting like an innocent spectator is not appropriate. You were fully aware of what you were doing. Tyler appeared to have considered arguing, but he must have changed his mind. "I apologize for what it's worth," he said silently. I didn't answer. In his face, I simply closed the door. Emily's text slowed and finally stopped as the days stretched into weeks. Completely. Through mutual connections, I learned that she was attempting to rebuild her life by staying with her friend Ashley, whatever that meant to me. It took longer. She hadn't removed anything, yet the house felt empty. I didn't regret my choice, but I would occasionally catch myself entering the kitchen after she left, expecting to see her standing there, only to realize she was gone. Mark returned one evening, this time with takeaway. In cozy stillness, we ate while sitting on the back porch. "This is going better for you than I anticipated," he said after a while, gazing out into the shadowed yard. "Although it's difficult, it's preferable to living in deception." He gave a nod, drinking his beer. "What will you do next?" That was the question. My future wasn't dependent on anyone else's for the first time in years. It was all mine. I'm not sure. Whatever it is, I confessed, it will be truthful. In a toast to honesty, Mark held up his bottle. With a tiny smile tugging at the corner of my mouth, I clinked my bottle against his. I had lost a lot to Emily, love, time, and trust, but she hadn't let me down completely. I had the opportunity to start anew now that I was still standing, and this time I would not accept anything less than the truth.